Okay, so Derek and Raphael gave excellent presentations, kind of generically on the labels. Sorry about that. But we're going to go over the methyl bromide label specifically today, cover some of the important points. So again, my name is Reichert. I'm the Fumigation Director for Western Pest Services. Our fumigation division, I oversee about 40 people. All we do is fumigation. We don't do any pest control on our side. The rest of the company handles that. But I've been in the company for about 26 years. Started out as a routed technician. Moved my way up to become a master technician for fumigation, of which there's only one in the company. Became a supervisor after that, service manager after that, and about a year ago I became the divisional director. So I've been in the business for quite a while. I don't want to say I've seen everything, but I've got to be getting pretty close at this point. So I'd like to share some of that knowledge with you, and hopefully we can all learn a little bit. So again, on the label, some of the most important things you need to remember are the safety, proper training, proper planning, proper equipment to be used. We're going to touch a little bit on fumigation management plans, as well as proper applications with the dosages and exposures of methyl bromide, proper monitoring, proper clearance, and then something that's really kind of a good industry practice is having an exit plan. So basically everything on here is coming from the label itself. If there's anything that's not on the label but something that should be used or utilized, I'll point that out as well specifically. So all of those points are very important. Safety is probably above the rest of them, but everything else is really on par. And again, all of these compromise what you could say is a fumigator's toolbox. Okay, so in order to be an effective fumigator, a safe fumigator, you need to really keep all these components in mind for every fumigation, no matter how big, no matter how small. They're all very important. So fumigants themselves, they can be very dangerous, but the fumigations, if done properly, can be handled very safely. Now we have to remember that methyl bromide is a restricted use pesticide, as are all fumigants, meaning they can only be purchased or applied by certified applicators. Methyl bromide is a commodity fumigant only, in the 100% that we're talking about today. There's also formulations that are used for soil fumigations, but that's kind of outside of our purview today. So we're really going to just stick to the commodity use of methyl bromide. But very important to remember, it's never to be used on or in residential structures. A lot of the fumigants, that's the same, but methyl bromide especially, again, it's really just for commodity fumigations at this point. It's not to be used in public restaurants or any food handling area not specifically allowed on the label. There's some very specific language on there of where it can be used that must be followed. And again, this is directly from the label. All persons working with methyl bromide must be knowledgeable about its hazards, trained in the use of the respiratory protection equipment and detection devices, emergency procedures, and the proper use of the fumigant. Again, directly from the label. When used for fumigation of enclosed spaces, which are listed on the label, 2 persons trained in the use of methyl bromide must be present during introduction of the fumigant, initiation of the aeration, after aeration when you're clearing the structure for re-entry. Now, 2 persons do not need to be present if the fumigation, application, aeration, and testing are done remotely. So if you're fumigating inside a building or inside a container, trailer, things like that, all the application and the readings are done outside of that fumigation area. You do not need to have 2 people there. All right, but another thing to remember with methyl bromide, though, you can fumigate trailers, rail cars, movable units. They are not to be moved or transported while under fumigation. All right, phosphine that is allowed, but methyl bromide it is not. So prior to moving a trailer or container that has been fumigated, it must be aerated at least partially. At that point, it can be placarded and moved to a final location where the aeration can be completed. Also, never allow entry by unprotected people into any fumigated area if the concentration readings are above 5 parts per million. Safety, again, is key. Okay, it's a violation of federal law, and again, this is on the label of any pesticide. It's a violation of federal law to use any pesticide in a manner inconsistent with the labeling. So you must be very clear about the label language, because that is what the regulators look at. And you know, they're not going to really get in confrontation with you, an argument. I always tell my people, if the regulators come out, you know, let them say what they want, let them write up what they want, and we'll deal with it back at the office. So, you know, the regulators are not always 100% right. There are some areas, you know, especially in dealing with some of the inspectors that we deal with for state agriculture, that really don't clearly understand the label. Again, it's good just to let them say what they want. They can write the reports up, and we can deal with it back at the office. But again, the label language, as it's written, is the law, and you are responsible as a certified applicator for following that. All right, we move into training. Applicator training really has two aspects to it. We have the certified applicator training, and then the applicator or operator training, depending on how your jurisdiction labels that. So what's the difference? Certified applicator training is a training required for the applicator of record. Okay, so that is the applicator who holds the state or territorially required license or certificate to apply the restricted use pesticide. He or she generally is the only one who can apply and remove the warning signs, sign the fumigation management plan, which we'll get into in a little while, fill out and sign application records, and either be physically present during the application or available as your state or territorial law requires. Now, the applicator or operator training is training required for any applicator who uses a restricted use pesticide under the supervision of a certified applicator. Now, again, depending on the local regulations, he or she may not be able to apply or remove warning signs, sign the FMP, or fill out and sign application records. So again, if you ever have any questions on this, see your local regulatory officials, check with them up front, and they'll give you the answer on what's required. As I say, state and territorial laws will vary as to the requirements to obtain either the certified applicator status or the operator or applicator status. That's been covered elsewhere in the workshop, but please do talk to regulatory officials. Again, all applicators must be trained in the use of and familiar with the labels and applicator manuals. As Derek said before, the label is not just the paper that's stuck on the side of the cylinder. All right, any other literature that comes along with that, applicator manuals, dosage manuals, with I can't forget what they're called, the fact sheets that have to go out to the customers, that's all part of the labeling, so all of that must be obeyed. Okay, again, all applicators should undergo regular updated training in order to stay aware of any changes or allowable uses in the products in which they apply. Training can be done in-house. It can be done at a workshop, much like we're at today, if available to you. And training should always be a combination of classroom and hands-on training covering the product label, personal protective equipment, the application techniques, monitoring and clearance devices, and any product-specific requirements. Okay, again, coming right from the label. I'll read this verbatim. All persons working with this fumigant must be knowledgeable about the hazards, trained in the use of the required respiratory protection equipment, detection devices, emergency procedures, and proper use of the fumigant. Again, the label is the law. You know, we repeat these points because they are very important. And again, when the regulators come out, they're going to be looking, and you have to know about the product, about its uses, what you can do, what you can't do with it. All right, very important. Okay, at a minimum, all applicators should know about planning for fumigation, the equipment needed for a fumigation, management plans, which again, currently that's a best practice, but on the new label, that will be a requirement. Application techniques, how to monitor, how to clear, and then again, not on the label, but a good industry practice is having an exit plan. We'll talk about that. All right, planning. Obviously, no methyl bromide or any fumigation should be done without prior planning. You know, you need to know what you're coming to fumigate, where you're going to fumigate it, any conditions of that site that you need to be aware of. When a fumigation is ordered, you know, you obviously want to meet with the parties that have ordered the fumigation, as well as where the fumigation is going to take place. You want to be able to, you can have that information to put together a fumigant management plan. And again, we'll cover that in a later slide, but preparation, prior planning is key to a successful and safe fumigation. Okay, again, you must ensure before you take any job that you have the proper equipment in place, that your employees are trained to use that the equipment's in good working order, and you have to make sure you have the proper amount of staff on hand, including the certified applicator. And you'll need to make sure that they're available for the duration of the fumigation. Because remember, they must be there not only for the introduction of the fumigant, but also for the clearing, the final clearing. Okay, you also must ensure that you have the full cooperation of both the customer and, again, the location where you're doing the fumigation. If it's being taken place inside a warehouse under tarps in a chamber, ensure that any people that are in that area are aware of the fumigation and will stay away from that area. So again, we do a lot of operations in the port areas. These are areas that are pretty much operational 24 hours a day. The good thing is that we're there on a regular basis. The people there know what we do, they know where we do it, they know when we do it. So we have all those plans in place already. When we show up to do a fumigation, we notify security, we notify management. We go in and start the process. We never have incidents where people just come walking in. They know the buildings that we operate in. When they see the signs, they know to stay out. So again, that's part of prior planning. Good communication with the customer, very important. Okay, when using signage, we did see copies of the signs yesterday. Again, you want to make sure that these are legible. If you're going to be using them outdoors, you want to be able to make sure that they're going to withstand weather, rain, wind, things like that, if that's expected. So you want to make sure the signs are filled out properly, the signs are placed properly. You can never use too many signs, I'll guarantee you that. But you have to be careful to make sure that all doors, all entrances, anywhere that anybody could possibly enter that structure or that fumigation area, there is signage there. The sign itself has to have certain things on it required by law. First is the skull and the crossbones symbol. Next is, in English and Spanish, danger peligro. Area under fumigation. Do not enter. Obviously, the fumigant that you're using, in this case, we're talking about methyl bromide, so you want to make sure that methyl bromide is stated on the sign. The date and time the fumigation commences. You can also put on there, if you want, the expected time and date that the fumigation will end. Then you want to make sure you have the name, address, and telephone number of the certified applicator in charge. And again, you really want that to be a 24-hour number. If you have a cell phone, that's a good number to put down there. Otherwise, if it goes to your office, you want to make sure that there's somebody in that office that can forward the call to the responsible party. Don't just have it go to an answering service. Because if there is an issue, if the regulators call that and they don't get a response, you will get fined for that. Yes?
It have to be in red, or it could be in black?
It's generally in red, the signs. I don't know if that's a requirement. That it be in red? I mean, all the signs that I've seen and the ones that we have printed up are in red, so I'm not 100% sure on that. I have seen people use signs that are photocopied. Again, I don't know if the regulator would have an issue with that, but you know, as I said, I'd probably do them in red just to be safe. Okay, again, now when we're talking about, oh, I'm sorry.
Does the site have to have any standard size?
Standard size or standard signs?
Sometimes we use we use copies with red letters as well.
Okay, yeah, the question was, does the sign have to be of a certain size? I do believe they have a minimum size requirement. Raphael, do you know offhand if they do? We'll check on that and get back to you. But again, as we're fumigating trailers, shipping containers, anything that can be moved, there are some special precautions you want to make sure you follow. Number one is having the unit staged in a non-traffic area. You obviously want it placed somewhere where there's not going to be a lot of people congregating. It's not an area where people park, people go out to smoke or eat. All right, so have that placed someplace out of the way where you can get access to it, you can get electrical power to it if you need it, but that it's out of the public's and any of the workers' areas. Ensure that, again, that the unit will not be moved during the fumigation. Generally, when you fumigate a trailer or a shipping container, there is some sealing you need to do with that around the doors, around the vents. Anytime that trailer is moved, as soon as they hook it up or start to move it, it's going to probably tear that tape, you'll lose your seal, and the job could likely fail. Number three is to properly secure the doors, make sure they're locked. Use your own padlocks, not locks provided by the driver or the company. You want to make sure that they don't have access to it with keys. You know, you want to have the only key to be able to open that door. Then obviously place your warning signs on the front and rear of the unit. As well, if there's any doors on the sides, you want to make sure they're signed as well. But you always want it on the back of the unit, obviously where the doors are, and then generally on the front of the unit, so anybody that's backing up to that trailer could also see that the unit's under fumigation. And again, with methyl bromide, very important, they are not to be transported under fumigation. Again, they can be aerated to a point where the airspace is down below 5 parts per million. If the commodity still might be a little higher, the signs can be put back on the trailer. It can be moved to a location where the aeration is completed. Okay, talking about the equipment now. Now, fumigation is obviously a specialized service. Okay, it should only be attempted by people that have the proper equipment and are properly trained to use it. You want to make sure you spend the time to teach your employees how to use the equipment, not just hand it to them with the owner's manuals. Show them how to use the equipment, make sure that they're comfortable using the equipment. Some of our people with the SCBAs, when we use personal protective equipment, not everybody can use an SCBA. They're not always comfortable. Some people can get claustrophobic. So again, it's not just explaining how to use it and giving them the equipment. Watch them use it a few times, make sure they're comfortable with it, make sure they're safe with it, and they understand how it operates. Again, to safely and effectively provide the fumigation service, you should be sure that your equipment is designed for the job. Sometimes fumigation equipment is not always readily available. Some of our equipment we have custom made. But again, we have the engineers design it properly and make sure that once it's built, it lives up to the requirements that we need. All right. Obviously, the equipment has to be well maintained and regularly inspected. And again, when you're doing inspections and maintenance on equipment, you always want to make sure you document that, because again, if there ever is a problem down the road and the inspectors come to you and start talking to you and asking you about your equipment, be it monitoring or application, ladders, anything like that, you can tell them, yeah, we inspected it. You can tell them we inspect it every week. If you don't have it written down, in their eyes, it didn't happen. So document everything you do. You can't over-document things. Okay, again, listing some of the equipment that we need for fumigation. Obviously, you need a suitable vehicle for transporting methyl bromide or any fumigant. You don't want to use a personal vehicle. You don't want to use a car. You want to use a pickup or some kind of truck that has a separate cab space from where the fumigants are transported. This way, if you have a cylinder that has a leak or you're bringing back spent phosphine, the driver is not exposed to any of those fumes. Ladders are another very important tool. We use them every day in fumigation. You want to make sure that the ladders you have are suitable for the type of work you're doing. You want to make sure that they're heavy-duty ladders, that they're inspected, that they're approved by OSHA, that your employees know how to use them. And again, there are ladder policies that OSHA has. You want to make sure you follow that during inspection. A lot of times, companies get tripped up by that. You could have brand new ladders, ladders that are less than a year old, they're in perfect shape. But if you don't inspect them and have that documented, that could be a violation. Obviously, we need hand tools to do our jobs. Sometimes you'll need hammers, pry bars, things like that to work on the doors of containers. Repairing pallets if you need to, prior to fumigation, repairing your fumigation equipment. Obviously, wrenches for attaching hoses to the cylinders. Scales, we talked about that yesterday. Make sure you have the scale to measure the amount of fumigant you need. For methyl bromide especially, if you're fumigating commodities, you'll need a type of volatilizer so that you can heat that liquid up, make sure that's in the gaseous state before it's introduced into the commodity. SCBAs, self-contained air respirators, whether it's air supplied or self-contained, either will work, but you want to make sure you have enough of those available for the staff that you have working on the fumigation. Again, that they're serviceable, they have air, and they've been inspected properly according to the manufacturer's recommendations and the OSHA requirements. Also, anybody that uses respirators, they need to be medically cleared prior to the use. They need to be fit tested with the type of respirator that they're going to use. Again, these are simple things to overlook, but if the inspectors come, that's the first thing they look for, and it's very easy to get fined over that. Monitoring and clearance devices, again, we'll talk about that a little later today, but just to give you a little overview, we'll talk about that. Padlocks and warning signs, as I said, you want to make sure that you have those available. The warning signs, again, you can't use too many of those, and any entrance into a fumigated structure or fumigated area, you want to make sure it's properly secured. The PPE, personal protective equipment, again, applicators must wear loose-fitting, long-sleeve shirts, long pants. Make sure you have shoes on, not open-toed shoes, not sandals, anything like that. For methyl bromide, you generally don't want to wear leather boots when you're working with that. You have the methyl bromide liquid. If that gets on the boot, on the leather, that'll get absorbed into the leather. And if not right at that point, another time when you wear those boots, you could actually get a methyl bromide chemical burn from that. We've seen that happen before. It's not a pretty thing. So you want to make sure that you're wearing loose-fitting shoes. A lot of our guys will wear kind of work sneakers where they do have the steel toe or the hard toe protection. They have the arch support, but they're nylon. They breathe very well. So we've never had an issue since we've switched over to those. Full face shield, safety goggles with a brow and temple shield. All right, you don't want to wear full face goggles, so they're really safety glasses, I'm sorry. You want to make sure that if you're in an environment where there are fumes there, you don't want them getting trapped between the eye protection and your eyes. So you want that open, but you want good protection. So that's why face shield is best. Glasses with the brow shield and temple shield is probably your next best. You don't want to wear gloves when working with methyl bromide. Cotton gloves or something, if you're moving the cylinders around, are okay, but again, you don't want to wear rubber gloves. You don't want anything that's going to trap that fumigant between the glove and your skin. And then we always recommend with our people, and really with any type of pesticide, you always want to carry a spare change of clothes, including shoes. If you do get that chemical on you, they say to take your clothes off and wash them, rinse them. The shoes, again, if I was wearing any type of shoe and it got drenched with methyl bromide, I'd probably just get rid of it. So you always want to make sure you have another change of clothing, complete change, including the shoes. Always a good idea. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about a fumigation management plan. For those of you that use sulfuryl fluoride and phosphine, you know about this. Anybody that strictly uses methyl bromide, again, it's not required currently, but it is on the new label, so it's something we do need to discuss. And really what it is just a documented plan. Again, you write down the steps and you write down what you did to satisfy the needs of a fumigation management plan. This way, if the regulator or the customer or anybody has any questions after the fumigation, you have this document which explains all the steps that you took to ensure that that fumigation was safe and effective. It's a very good document to have. Again, a properly prepared FMP will address everyone involved in the fumigation, from the fumigator, the applicator, the customer, the owner of the goods, any of the health, safety, and emergency personnel that you'd contact. All right, it ensures that proper pre-fumigation notifications have taken place. Again, whether you have to notify your local regulatory officials, hospitals, ambulance, police, fire, anybody that needs to be notified can be documented on that sheet, so you make sure you don't miss anybody. It'll ensure that the fumigator has all the necessary safety, application, monitoring, and clearance equipment needed. Again, it's written down, it's documented, it shows that you have those devices available to you. It's a reminder to make sure that you have those devices properly calibrated. It'll also ensure that the necessary PPE is available. It ensures that the treatment site is suitable for methyl bromide fumigation. Part of the plan, if you're fumigating a structure, is to have drawings of the structure itself. Again, with methyl bromide, you're really down to fumigating trailers, tarp jobs, things like that, but still, you can document where those jobs are taking place within a property line of a customer's location. So it's very good. Doesn't have to be a great sketch, but just having all the proper points on that map that you draw is good. We'll ensure, again, that the fumigator is properly prepared for the fumigation. Again, there's no official template for an FMP. There are points that have to be satisfied for the FMP, so most of the fumigators I know kind of all do things a little differently. For us, if it's a structure or a site that we're at on a regular basis, we have a pretty involved FMP that covers a lot of different issues. But for our technicians that are out on the road every day, they may go to a site once every 6 months or may only go to a site once. So we have kind of an abbreviated, what we call a short form, where all the information is just to fill in the blank on the front. On the back, you can flip it over and do your diagram. It's a lot easier for the technicians to use. It's a lot less involved, but it still satisfies all those requirements and shows that the job is properly planned, prepared for, and that you have all the equipment available to do it. Okay, again, as I said, methyl bromide is really for commodities. The soil we're not going to get into today. That's a little bit more involved, a little different. But for the application for commodities, it's a pretty straightforward process. The label does explain it very well. They've got very good applicator manuals. But again, really the two constants that you want to make sure that you stress to your people are dosages and exposures. For two reasons, well, for several reasons actually. Number one, it'll keep you out of trouble with the regulators. You know, you want to know what that maximum dosage and maximum exposure time is for methyl bromide, for any fumigant again. You don't want to exceed those numbers. You want to make sure that the commodity that you're treating is, number one, allowed to be treated. And on the methyl bromide label, they have tables in the back that tell you the commodities that can be treated with methyl bromide. If it's not on there, chances are you can't treat it. Okay, the only exception to that is for some of the USDA or quarantine treatments. There are allowable uses that are not on the label, but that the USDA does allow. Okay, but again, don't do those treatments unless it's allowed by either of those two sources. You also want to make sure for the public, if you overexpose something, you can add residues to a product that can be above the limits that are allowed by the FDA or EPA. So again, that's a very involved process if that happens, so you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. Your exposure periods as well, you don't want to overexpose anything for a length of time. We treat a lot of imported commodities that are perishable, so we have to be very careful with the dosages and the exposures that we use. Certain commodities are very susceptible to damage with methyl bromide, others are not. So if we treat certain commodities, citrus for example, if they're treated at a higher dose or held for a longer period of time, there's a very real risk of damaging the commodity. And these commodities are very expensive, so you want to be very careful. You know, we'll treat thousands of pallets at a time, so if we misapply something or damage product, you know, we can talk about $7 million worth of fruit that gets damaged in one night. So we have to be very careful. So again, as I said, they're both critical factors. You know, you want to make sure you follow the dosages, follow the exposures that are listed either in the label or in the treatment manual from the regulatory officials. Be sure your workers are clear on that point as well. You know, any incidents that happen, you know, you as a certified applicator are going to be responsible for that. As a business owner, it takes it even to the next step, all right? Because you'll be paying not only the fines, but the damage claims as well. So you want to make sure your people are very well versed on what is and is not allowed. You know, if they're not sure, they should be open to asking you, you know, make sure that they're not afraid to talk to people, supervisors and all that. You want to have very open lines of communications with your workers. Okay, monitoring, there's really two aspects to monitoring. Number one is monitoring the actual fumigation itself, to where you want to make sure you maintain that concentration within the fumigation area. That's done with a fumoscope. We'll show you a picture of that. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that unit. Again, that draws air samples through the unit. It gives you your actual concentration reading in ounces per 1,000 cubic feet. You know that dosage, you know what you need to maintain to kill that pest. So all you have to do is maintain those readings. You know, if you need to add a little bit more gas, you can. You know, if you do your measurements, it also lets you know if maybe you mismeasured something. If you know you're supposed to be putting 48 ounces per 1,000 into a fumigation enclosure, and you're coming up with readings that started out at 32 ounces, you know you did not put enough fumigant in there, and really the only thing is you either didn't put enough in, if you misread the scale, or you misread your dimensions. So it's a good way to check and make sure that you're putting in the proper amount of fumigant. It allows you the option of adding fumigant, as they say, if they're a little low. But there's also monitoring done outside the fumigation area, and that's your ambient concentration monitoring. And that's the safety, the hygiene, whatever you want to call it, but that's very important as well. All right, it's important for your workers, it's important for any bystanders. It's also important where if you're leaking fumigant from an enclosure, you know those concentrations are going to drop. So you want to know where that leak is occurring. You want to get there and repair that leak and stop the fumigant loss. But again, the concentration monitoring is obviously documented, but the ambient monitoring, you also want to document that, okay? You don't want to just say, well, yeah, it was below 5 parts per million, because if somebody claims to get sick or exposed, you want to show that, okay, at such and such a location, at such and such a time, I took this reading and this is what it was, okay? And it's okay to have a reading above the 5 parts per million, but then you just have to say what you did to satisfy the requirement to get it below 5 parts per million. People don their PPE, you increase the aeration in the facility, take another reading a few minutes later and show that that level dropped. But again, please document it. This is a picture of the Fumoscope. This is a newer version. We still have some of the older versions in stock, the metal ones, they work fine. But this unit basically draws the air sample through the unit, heats it up, takes a reading on that, and will give you its concentration. The readings that we have, or the Fumoscopes that we have, will give readings both for sulfuryl fluoride and methyl bromide. You can get that just specific to one or the other, or to read both. They're pretty robust units. Some of ours we've had for 15 years. We send them down regularly to get calibrated. We actually calibrate them ourselves. We're allowed to do that. But once a year, we still send them down to Key Chemical to get them checked out, get them calibrated officially from them, and make sure they stay in working order. You want to make sure you have several of these units available, not just one. This way, if one goes down, if it's out for service, you have that other unit as a backup. Okay, again, monitoring should be done, and this is for the concentration monitoring. Should be done at least hourly during the treatment, at least to start. If your readings equalize and you don't have any gas loss, you can kind of extend those a bit, every couple hours, every 3 hours, depending on what you need, what your needs are, what the customer requires. Again, if you're fumigating a quarantine treatment, then generally the USDA or whatever agency will have a specific requirement as to when the readings need to be taken, and obviously what those readings should be as a minimum. So you want to at least satisfy that. You can always take additional readings, but you always want to at least take the ones that are required by the USDA or whatever agency. Again, the monitoring equipment should be calibrated according to the manufacturer's directions. All right, generally that's once a year. Some are slightly more, some are slightly less. As I said, we do calibrate our own. We do that. We are certified by the USDA. We have a compliance agreement with them, so we can certify or calibrate our own units. Again, just for our own purposes, we do send them in regularly to get them calibrated by an outside source. But that's something you want to make sure is done, and again, you want to make sure you document it. It's a good idea to either write it on the unit itself when it was done, or be able to keep lists. Some of the newer units actually have a countdown timer in there, which is nice. But again, as long as you document things, you should know where that equipment is, when it was last calibrated, and when it needs to go in for its next calibration. All right, now clearing is once the fumigation is over. It's basically just the process of taking ambient air concentrations inside the fumigation area to be sure that you're below that TLV. Okay, currently we're 5 parts per million. Obviously, no entry is allowed in that area when concentrations are above the TLV unless you're wearing the personal protective equipment. Okay? And again, if we're in a fumigation area, our people know that if you don't know what the concentration is, assume it's above 5 and put your PPE on, okay? So you're allowed to go into that area, but you must either first take a reading to confirm it's below or assume it's above and put on your PPE. When you're clearing, the final clearance, the only devices that are allowed by label in methyl bromide currently are the direct reading detection devices. Okay, that's your Draeger pumps, your Matheson, I think, is the Kitagawa, or the Sensodyne. Okay, whatever unit you use, make sure that you use the proper tubes for that. Okay, they're not interchangeable, the colorimetric tubes. So you want to make sure that if you have a Sensodyne, you use their tubes. If you have a Draeger, you use their tubes. Again, you want to make sure your people know how to use them. It's not just a process of breaking the tube, putting it in, and using it. Each tube, each unit works a little differently. Even sometimes the low reading tubes versus the high reading tubes will have different requirements for their use. Okay, so make sure you understand it, make sure your employees understand it. Very important. Okay, another device that we use is Mini-Ray. We can use this for taking readings, ambient concentration readings in the airspace around the fumigation area. But the problem with these units, they're photoionization detectors, so they'll pick up any VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds. So anything in there can affect the reading, okay? Basically what this the unit does is take a reading, and it knows we're looking for methyl bromide, so it'll convert whatever it's getting to methyl bromide, okay? So we can be in an area that's never even had a fumigation, and they may have just painted the area. It'll show that there's methyl bromide there because it's picking up a VOC. Now we know it's not methyl bromide because we didn't do a fumigation there. So when we use these, they are a good tool, but again, if it's showing anything on there, we assume it's methyl bromide. It's 5 parts per million or above. We'll check it with the Draeger tube just to make sure. The good thing about these units is they're instantaneous. If you're standing here and you get 5 parts per million, you back up here, you're gonna get 4 parts per million. With the Draeger tube, you know that's not the case. It takes several minutes to get an accurate reading on a Draeger tube, where again, these are instantaneous. But again, by law, these cannot be used to clear a structure. I can walk through the structure and find out that there are no readings on this unit. It's down to 1 part or 0 part. That's fine, but I cannot turn the building over to the customer unless we document and take a reading with a direct reading detection device. And again, make sure you document that. Don't just take one, take several. Write down where you did it, write down when you did it, who did it, and what the reading was. Okay, again, after the fumigation is done, we always like to have what we call an exit plan. Again, this is really a best industry practice. It's not required by the label, but you want to sit down after the fumigation, talk with your people, talk with the customer, talk with the location where you did the fumigation, make sure everything went well. You know, from every fumigation you can learn something, and you can apply that to the next fumigation. Could be something simple, could be something severe. But no matter what it is, you really want to talk to everybody afterwards. You know, verify with the customer that you did what they expected them to do. That's the time to hash it out, not 2 days later when you get a phone call that, you know, well, you didn't do this, you didn't do this. So again, gives you a final time to go through that job, make sure you did everything you were expected to do, make sure all your materials and fumigation materials are removed from the scene, loaded properly in your truck and disposed of. So again, it's not required by the label, but it's a very good practice. Okay, so let's go over what we talked about today. You know, number one, using methyl bromide safely. Safety, again, is the key to any fumigation, any fumigant, any pesticide. You know, anytime there's issues, it looks bad for the company, it looks bad for the applicator, it looks bad for the customer, it looks bad for the industry. So really, operate safely, train your people to operate safely. You know, we'll be doing this for many years to come. All right, your proper applicator training. Again, it's not just a certified applicator, it's any applicator or operator that uses the product. You want to make sure they're comfortable in using it. You want to make sure they're comfortable with all the equipment, all the clearance equipment, all the detection equipment, everything that goes along with the fumigation. You can't overtrain. Proper planning of the fumigation. Very important. Again, before you do that job, you want to make sure all the steps are covered, you have all the equipment available, you have the people available. You have the full faith of the customer that you're doing work with and the location you're doing the work at. Methyl bromide fumigation equipment. You want to make sure you have everything that you need. Again, you don't want to get to a job and find out you don't have a volatilizer, or you know the volatilizer you have doesn't work properly, or you don't have the proper monitoring equipment. Make sure you have all that prior to doing the job. Fumigation management plan, again, not required on this label, it will be required on the next label. But again, it's a good practice to get into. It's a very effective document. It really helps out and makes sure that everybody's on the same page for every fumigation. And it gets your people too in that mindset where they don't skip a step because they're so used to seeing this. They know, okay, you know, I've got to list who we contact and you know what time we're doing the fumigation and all that. All those points are on that management plan, so that it really becomes second nature to them. So it's a very effective tool. Proper application of methyl bromide. Again, you want to make sure you're giving the correct dosage, the correct exposure, you're getting the results that the customer expects, and you're not damaging the commodities or the area that you're fumigating. Monitoring of the methyl bromide fumigation, again, very important. You want to make sure that that fumigation is efficacious, it's doing what you're telling the customer it's going to do. You know, you're not shortchanging the customer, you're not giving a treatment that could lead to resistance or could lead to a later reintroduction of pests to the customer's location. Clearance after methyl bromide fumigation, again, very important, probably one of the most important steps. And we want to make sure that structure, that fumigation area is clear. Again, make sure you document it. Don't just take one reading, take as many as you can. This way, if anybody claims to get ill or claims that something was damaged afterwards, you know that, hey, that methyl bromide was out of that area at such and such a time before we left that job. Final steps in fumigation, again, that exit plan, we think it's very important. Not required by the label, but it is something good to do. Just, again, talking with your people, talking with the customer, talking with the site location, covering all the points that were done to make sure that they are satisfied, and, if you need to make any changes, it shows that you're proactive, you care. You can make those changes either in the next time you're at that customer or even on the next fumigation. As I said, you'll learn something from almost every job you do. Okay, methyl bromide now. We do know that there is a new label coming out. Some of the changes that should be noted. They've introduced new worker protection standards, okay? Don't know if Roger wants to talk about that. If anybody has any questions about that, we can certainly address that a little bit. But they are coming out with a lower threshold limit value. But it's not just a straight value. They have time-weighted average written into that part of the regulation, so it's going to be a little different than what we're normally used to doing. Buffer zones are something new to methyl bromide. There are tables that we have to look up now when you're doing a fumigation. Buffer zones change depending on the location, depending on the dosage. There's several factors that affect it. As I said, fumigation management plans will be standard now. They'll be required. We think that's a really good change, but it's something that the people aren't used to with methyl bromide for sure. And there's some new aeration procedures attached to the new label as well. Now again, the EPA, oh, I'm sorry, I thought I changed the slide. It's actually probably going to be in the second quarter of 2016. But the EPA has approved the final label language from the registrants. It is now out for the state and territorial approval. Once they get that back, then the label will be printed up, the new labels, and they'll start to see them on product, but it'll probably be in the second quarter of 2016. Again, this is a website here for EPA. It's got a lot of information on there about the methyl bromide label. It will show you the buffer tables, the buffer zones. Probably a good idea to get on there and start looking around because they're kind of involved. There's a lot of information you need to look at, and it's basically just going down, finding the treatment schedule that you're using, the size of the enclosure. Once you have that information, you can certainly figure out the size of your buffer zone. And again, they do change from fumigation to fumigation, so it's not just always the same. You know, if you have a 10,000 cubic foot enclosure and your buffer zone is 50 feet, for one instance, it may be 200 feet for another instance. So you always want to, every time you're doing a fumigation, make sure you look those tables up. 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 Look those tables up.